Hey guys, Zor here from ZorGameGeek.com. Today I want to talk to you about Vampire the Masquerade. The most recent edition of this game that started in the 1980s just came out, and if you don't know what Vampire the Masquerade is, it is kind of what it says in the title. It's about vampires. Your player characters are going to be vampires. They are predators. They need to eat blood of living human beings, for the most part, to sustain themselves, to activate their powers. It is who they are. And this places Vampire the Masquerade at odds with other games like Dungeons & Dragons and other fantasy games where there's a risk of your character becoming a vampire. But that's usually the end of the character. Or there might be some sort of side quest of redemption, of curing the vampirism, similar to if you become a lycanthrope, a werewolf, to cure that lycanthropy. But not in Vampire the Masquerade. You have been embraced, and you may be a new vampire, or you may have been around 50 years, or you may have been around 150 years, or depending on the power level that you're starting at, you may have been around 500 years. That's really up to you and the game master. But in Vampire the Masquerade, the world is that it's the masquerade. You do not want to be known, you do not want it to be known that vampires exist. You need to keep it secret because even though you are alpha predators, every morning you are out cold. You cannot stay awake and you have to be indoors. And if you are dragged outside during the day in your stupor, you are going to have permanent death. That makes them vulnerable. And so they have to keep the masquerade up to protect themselves from threats. And there are threats. There are divisions within the world, the Society of Vampires. There are, even within the vampire factions, there are coteries and groups that are aligned, but maybe there's some political machinations, and really that's a lot of the gameplay in Vampire the Masquerade, is that internal vampire politics. Because when you live forever and you have to deal with this guy for the rest of your unnatural life, you can really learn to hate them or really like them, or maybe kind of go back and forth, but it's about power and working your way up the hierarchy and being the top dog, because again, vampires are supposed to be the apex predators, and when you're around a bunch of other apex predators, fights happen. Now there are other supernatural threats out there. There's the Fae, there are mages, wizards, werewolves, because again, this is the White Wolf world system called World of Darkness. And they have a bunch of different books and a bunch of different settings that explore different elements of this, where there are conflicts between these creatures. But in Vampire the Masquerade, really the focus is on the vampires themselves. But with this edition, the masquerade has been broken. Prior editions, there were these vampire hunters. They are associated generally with the Catholic Church or with certain German fictional characters from Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'll let you figure it out yourself. But they're aware of it, but it's not broadcast out loud because you would be considered a crazy person to say there's vampires. But they hunt them. In this edition, somehow, U.S. intelligence agencies and other foreign intelligence agencies have found out about vampires, and they've started what's been termed the Second Inquisition. But it's not a religious inquisition. It's a technological. It's a spycraft. It's a terrorist inquisition. And so the vampires are on their heels. They used to be able to rely upon their cell phones and their computers and their technology. Even though some of these guys and gals are hundreds and hundreds of years old, there's younger vampires who know how to use these things. And so, but as we know with technology, it can be tracked, it can be hacked, it can be broken into. And so now the vampires are on their heels. They're having to use burner phones. They're having to change locations frequently. They're having to watch for the Second Inquisition breaking in and finding their cells, finding their hiding places during the day, and dragging them out into the sunlight. And so that's created this grand new tension within the latest edition of Vampire the Masquerade. But there's also some mechanical elements that they've added to this edition that make this new tension between your former humanity and your status as a vampire. Because that's part of this tension, the body horror of vampirism, is you're still you. You are still the person who has a mother and a father and maybe had a wife and maybe had kids and had nieces and nephews, and they've grown up and you've watched them grown up, and you're still around and you're protecting maybe your family line, but sometimes you get hungry and you get out of control and you frenzy and you may accidentally kill a loved one. With the latest edition of Vampire the Masquerade, that edge is represented by hunger dice. As you get hungry, as you don't feed, you get dots in your hunger. And for each dot, you have to substitute a hunger dice for when you roll your checks. And if you roll really well or really poorly on those hunger dice with your other dice, then a frenzy can occur. A critical failure can occur where you lash out and feed uncontrollably, or you kill somebody, and that creates a moment of tension within, they use the word stain, on your humanity. And over time, that humanity goes down. And it's really hard, if not impossible. There might be, a few little rules in there. The game master may give you some opportunities to push that humanity back up again. But generally, it's conceived as a one-way track down. And when your humanity reaches 0, you have become the monster. You have become the monster that the D&D worlds, the fantasy worlds, view as vampires, and your character is retired. If you want to learn more about Vampire the Masquerade, go to zorgamegeek.com/vampire. Again, zorgamegeek.com/vampire. Keep gaming.